where are you sitting? You might. Yes, spinal cord, reflex arch. Yes. Now using this knowledge, we will continue studying. So we were saying that simple reflex arch, yes, it consists of 2 or 3 neurons, and always axons of sensory neuron and bodies of sensory neuron, they are located in dorsal root ganglia, and axons of sensory neurons always attaches to posterolateral sulcus, yes, and axons of motor neurons always leave through anterolateral sulcus to reach target organ. So, and this is like reflex arch, scheme of reflex arch, but in fact, where is your cap? We know that there are numerous, like ganglion is a group of neuron bodies, and actually it's a huge group. They can be 1,000, 5 to 10,000 cells in one ganglion. And so there are very many fibers. And we were saying also that this axons of, not only axons, but also bodies, so together, these fibers of sensory neurons, they form dorsal root, so it's always sensory, so it always transmits impulses towards the CNS, and dorsal root is formed by fibers of motor neurons, so it's always motor, and it carries fibers from the CNS, from the spinal cord. So they are numerous. So this is ventral root, this is dorsal root. At the region of intervertebral foramen, these 2 roots, dorsal and ventral, this we also saw, they join together and they form trunk of spinal nerve. This is trunk of spinal nerve. It's very short, 1 to 1.5 centimeters. And after leaving through intervertebral foramen, each trunk of spinal nerve is further divided into branches. So roots, they are unidirectional, they transmit impulses only in one direction, from or to CNS, and these branches, they are bidirectional, so they contain both sensory and motor fibers. The largest branches of spinal nerve are anterior branch, and posterior branch. So they are bidirectional, as you see. They transmit impulses both to and from CNS, from spinal cord, posterior branch. That's why nerves, which we will start to study today, they are mixed, so they are responsible for both movement and sensation. Okay, but this is not all. There is also meningeal branch, we said. It is sensory branch. It arises from trunk of spinal nerve. Right after it leaves through intervertebral foramen, goes back to supply meninges. So this is meningeal branch, and it is purely sensory. Such a structure is specific for spinal nerves from C1 to C7, for example. Yes, because we said that if it is a segment from C to L3, then it has additional horn, that is lateral horn, and we were saying that it is autonomic horn. Yes, it contains autonomic nuclei, and from this autonomic nuclei, fibers also start, and they also leave through anterolateral sulcus. They are also motor fibers, but these are somatomotor fibers, which are responsible for movement of skeletal muscles, for voluntary movement, yes? And these are visceral motor fibers, which are responsible for contraction and relaxation of smooth muscular tissue. But also these fibers, they conduct impulses transmit impulses from the CNS. And after trunk of spinal nerve, these autonomic fibers get separated from a common trunk, and they come up to autonomic ganglion. When we study autonomic nervous system, we will say that structure of somatic and autonomic reflex arches is different. We were learning to draw somatic reflex arch. Autonomic reflex arch is slightly different in structure because it has 2 motor neurons. First motor neuron is located in the CNS, in the lateral one, if we are talking about spinal cord, yes. Body of second motor neuron is located outside of CNS, and it forms autonomic ganglion. ganglionic ganglion. And so these fibers, they come up to the ganglion. These fibers are known as white communicating branch. So this one is white communicating branch. Communicating branch. Or also we can call these fibers preganglionic fibers because they are before the ganglia. And from the ganglion, postganglionic fibers start, and these postganglionic fibers, they join both anterior and posterior branches. So they join anterior branch and they join posterior branch. So all anterior and posterior branches, they contain autonomic fibers. And these branches are known as gray communicating branch. This is gray communicating branch. Why do they have such names? Because they are different in color. When we studied CNS, we were saying that there is gray and white matter. And we were saying that gray matter is formed by neuron bodies, yes? And white matter is formed by processes. And we were also saying that this white color is given to processes due to myelin sheath, yes? Due to Schwann cells which surround axons of neurons, and they give this white color. So this white communicating branch, fibers which form white communicating branches, they are also white in color because they are also surrounded by myelin sheath as all the somatic fibers. But for autonomic fibers, it's not like that. Not all the autonomic fibers are covered by myelin sheath. And speed of impulse conduction, we will talk about it later, is slower in autonomic fibers than in somatic. So these postganglionic fibers are not covered by myelin sheath, and that's why they are gray in color. So that's why they are named gray communicating branches. What is also necessary to understand? If it is a segment of spinal cord below, above C8 or below L3, then there are no autonomic fibers which live through anterolateral sulcus. So there is no white communicating branch. But still, gray communicating branches from upper or lower spinal nerves, they come up to anterior and posterior branches of the spinal nerves because all parts of our body need autonomic supply. So gray communicating branches are always present. White communicating branches can be absent in some spinal nerves which arise not from these segments, yes, which contain lateral horn. So what we will concentrate on now when we study peripheral nervous system, we will study anterior and posterior branches. So anterior branches in humans and in highest animals, they are better developed because anterior branches, they supply anterior part of the body, so they give sensory and motor both supply to anterior parts of the body and also to the limbs. So upper and lower limbs, they are completely supplied by anterior branches. Posterior branches are not that well developed because they supply only posterior part of the trunk, yes, posterior part of the body. So anterior branches, as they, most of them, do not pass individually from each other. They join together and they form plexus. Plexus, it is singular. Plexus, yes, like choroid plexus, we have already met this word. Plexi, it is in plural. So what is it? It's like anterior branches from different spinal nerves. They join together, form this kind of a network, plexus, yes, and then from this plexus, another branches start, another nerves. And within these nerves, anterior branches from several spinal nerves can be present. For example, we will say now that cervical plexus, this is the first plexus which we will study, is formed by anterior branches of spinal nerves from C1 to C4. And it gives different branches. For example, one of the branches, it is Phrenic nerve. So Phrenic nerve, it consists of anterior branches from C2 to C4 spinal nerve. Actually, when we study anatomy, we will not pay so much attention at this composition of each particular nerve. But in your FMG questions, there are many such questions. So you should know, like, what is the root value? You should know root value of these nerves. So actually, frankly speaking, I personally do not know all of them. But for your FMG exam, you will need to study it also. Okay, so that's it. The only anterior branches of spinal nerves which do not form plexus, these are anterior branches of thoracic spinal nerves. So they go mathematically, like along the inferior margin of each rib, yes, and they supply muscles and the skin individually without forming plexus. All the rest, they form plexus. So any questions up to here?
No.
So now let's...
No.
Yes. So now please let's try to see something in overview. The nervous system, we will study for two classes only. It is a very small topic. No, actually, what you have to understand, this peripheral nervous system is not correct name for this topic, because peripheral nervous system consists of not only spinal nerves, but also cranial nerves. Now we will study only spinal nerves. Cranial nerves we will study later in another topic. So the spinal nerves we'll study for two lessons. First, today we'll start with cervical and brachial plexus and anterior branches of thoracic spinal nerves. At the next lesson, each of you will have to draw this formation and branches of spinal nerve. Each of you will draw. So, okay, let's start with cervical plexus. Plexus cervicalis. So when you describe plexus, you should first give us the name, always, yes, and then you should tell us formation. How is the cervical plexus is formed? So plexus is always formed by anterior branches. If you don't say this, it is wrong. So you always should say the cervical plexus is formed by anterior branches or ventral rami. It's written in your BDC textbook. Ventral rami of cervical spinal nerves from C1 to C4. It's for cervical plexus. Then you describe the topography. So cervical plexus starts like the spinal nerves arise laterally from upper cervical vertebrae, yes, and then they pass through the muscles of the neck and they appear under the skin at the posterior margin of sternocleidomastoid muscle. So while we study peripheral nervous system, you will have to revise the whole myology, yes? All the muscles, topography, everything you will revise. So sternocleidomastoid muscle you have to revise also. Here we can see branches of cervical plexus. And cervical plexus has motor branches, sensory branches, and one mixed branch, that is phrenic nerve. So motor fibers, they supply muscles of the neck, the suboccipital muscles. What are they? Like they are small, you will revise. Sensory branches, purely sensory branches of cervical plexus are 4 in number. And first, we do not see it here, it is a greater auricular nerve, nervus auricularis magnus. Greater auricular nerve starts from the posterior margin of sternocleidomastoid muscle and goes upward, and it reaches ear lobule, yes, and here at the ear lobule it is divided into 2 branches, anterior and posterior. Anterior branch of greater auricular nerve supplies anterior-inferior part of the auricle, skin, yes, and posterior branch, it supplies posterior-inferior part of skin of the auricle, and also it supplies skin behind the auricle. This is greater auricular nerve. Second branch of cervical plexus is lesser occipital nerve, this one, nervus occipitalis minor. It also, all of them arise from posterior margin of sternocleidomastoid muscle, yes, and then this nerve moves upward and it forms its terminal branches in the skin of occipital region medially from the area that is supplied by greater auricular nerve. This one, yes, posteromedially from this area that is supplied by greater auricular nerve. The most posterior and the most medial part of the skin of this occipital region is supplied by greater occipital nerve. We will not study it for the next lesson because greater occipital nerve, it is posterior branch of spinal nerves, yes, not anterior. Okay, this is lesser occipital nerve. The other is transverse cervical nerve, nervus transversus cervicis. Like that it goes. Or nervus transversus colli. It also arises from posterior margin of sternocleidomastoid muscle, then it crosses it, like moves anteriorly, crosses it, and it in the neck, in the anterior anterolateral region of the neck, it forms anastomosis with a branch descending cervical.
Answer cervical is
Yes, with descending cervical branch from facial nerve. Here they form superficial ansa cervicalis. Ansa means loop, yes, superficial cervical loop. This superficial cervical loop supplies skin of the anterolateral region of the neck with platysma muscle. Platysma muscle is supplied by fibers from facial nerve, because we said that all of these branches which we are describing now, they are purely sensory. So fibers from this cervical plexus, transverse cervical nerve, it supplies mainly skin, and fibers from facial nerve supply platysma muscle, because platysma muscle is also considered as one of the mimic muscles together. Yes, they have the same structure, lies very superficially attached to the skin, so many features from muscles of facial expression for platysma muscle. Okay.
It must be excluded from the neck one region. It must be excluded from
no, it
the
is
neck.
due to the topography. It is muscle of the neck. But if to look at the structure, it has very similar, and nerve supply also. It has very similar with mimic muscles, muscles of facial expression.
It is only supplied by the facial nerve.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, platysma muscle, yes. Okay, then the fourth branch, cutaneous or sensory branch of cervical plexus, it is supraclavicular. Actually, they are many. Supraclavicular nerves, they are numerous. So here we can see them. Here they are, all of the supraclavicular nerves. They supply skin above the clavicle, and because they are numerous, they are divided into three groups. There are lateral supraclavicular nerves, intermediate, and medial supraclavicular nerves. Cervical plexus also gives branches to form deep cervical loop, deep ansa cervicalis. It goes to form the anastomosis with hypoglossal nerve. Hypoglossal nerve. So from anterior branches from first and second cervical spinal nerve, it also goes anteriorly. Here we do not see it, but it can be visible in the museum. If you want, you can go to anatomy museum. Maybe. Yes, if we have time, we'll go next time. I'm not sure. But for cranial nerves, we will definitely go. So this deep cervical loop, deep ansa cervicalis, it is anastomosis with hypoglossal nerve, and it supplies infrahyoid muscles, and one of the suprahyoid muscles, that is geniohyoid muscle. Yes, geniohyoid muscle. So infrahyoid and suprahyoid muscles, you also have to revise. And so mixed branch of cervical plexus is phrenic nerve. Nervus phrenicus. It is the longest branch of cervical plexus, and it contains both sensory and motor fibers. Here we can see it. This is left phrenic nerve, and this is yes, this is right phrenic nerve. Right phrenic nerve. So topography of right and left phrenic nerves is different. You have to know it. A right phrenic nerve, no, first both of them arise from cervical plexus, yes, move downward, enter thoracic cavity through superior thoracic aperture. A right phrenic nerve goes along the lateral surface of superior vena cava, then it crosses a root of the right lung from anterior side, continues moving downward, reaches the diaphragm, and it pierces the diaphragm through hiatus for inferior vena cava. Inferior vena cava. So I told you it has both sensory and motor fibers. Sensory fibers, they go to pericardium, yes, to peritoneum, parietal peritoneum that covers the inferior surface of the diaphragm, diaphragmatic pleura also, and also it supplies visceral peritoneum that covers right lobe of the liver. Right lobe of the liver. Muscular fibers supply diaphragm, yes, phrenic nerve. It supplies phrenic muscle, yes, diaphragm. That's why it's named phrenic nerve. Left phrenic nerve also enters thoracic cavity through superior thoracic aperture. Then it crosses aortic arch. But look, yesterday we saw it. This is superior vena cava, and this is aortic arch.
Lateral to thoracic aorta.
Lateral to
thoracic aorta.
What?
Left one.
No, lateral to superior vena cava.
No, I am
left one. Yes, lateral to thoracic aorta. Yes, crosses aortic arch anteriorly and then goes laterally to thoracic aorta. No, so and laterally to the heart also, and it is also crosses a root of the left lung from anterior side, and it pierces diaphragm in a special opening, like special for separate opening for left phrenic nerve. In Sabin it's written that it pierces
Costal.
diaphragm, yes, between central tendon and costal part. In the other books, I saw that it just passes through central tendon of the diaphragm. About this topography of right and left phrenic nerves, also in Sapin it's written that right phrenic nerve passes ventrally, but actually
no, it should be ventrally, left one.
Yes,
Because
I
it is
also
passing
think
the
that
costal.
yes, I also think that actually it is wrong in Sapin, but please look in your books
Yes,
what
yes.
is written. I think that the left phrenic nerve passes more ventrally.
And I have doubt in this one. Right phrenic, you said it will be passing through the vena, so
the
inferior
hiatus
vena
for
cava.
inferior.
But you last day you said that it will be passes through the central tendon of
Yes,
root
also
of
it
this
is written in Sapin. Today I
Okay,
checked. In Sapin it's written that it passes through central tendon just. But in the other books today I have checked, it passes through hiatus for inferior vena cava. I think it's more correct. It passes through hiatus for inferior vena cava.
Then it must also passing through the hiatus for the aortic.
No,
Okay, central tendon.
central tendon. Yes. Okay, and so also left phrenic nerve, it supplies again pericardium, pleura, yes, parietal peritoneum that covers the inferior surface of the diaphragm, visceral peritoneum that surrounds left lobe of the liver, and visceral peritoneum that surrounds stomach. That is left phrenic nerve.
Region.
Yes. So yes, visceral peritoneum that surrounds organs of epigastrium. Yes. So this is phrenic nerve. This is cervical plexus. Cervical plexus is not that much difficult. Now brachial plexus, plexus brachialis. Plexus brachialis is formed by anterior branches of lower cervical spinal nerves from C5 to C8 and partially anterior branch of the first thoracic spinal nerve. And branches of brachial plexus, they supply upper limb. So brachial plexus is longer and it is better developed. Here we can see it. This is brachial plexus. This is also here brachial plexus. Yes. So according to the topography, it starts from lateral surfaces of the lower cervical vertebrae, yes, and then it passes in the interscalene space. How interscalene space is formed, you will revise for the next lesson, yes. And in relation to the clavicle, brachial plexus is divided into two parts. Supraclavicular part, pars supraclavicularis, that is above the clavicle, and infraclavicular part, that is below the clavicle, pars infraclavicularis. Here in supraclavicular part, brachial plexus is divided into trunks or colons. Superior trunk or colon, middle, and inferior. In the infraclavicular part here, it is divided into cords or bundles in relation to axillary artery. So these three cords, they surround axillary artery and they form three cords. That cord that is located laterally, it is lateral cord, fasciculus lateralis. What, this one? Lateral cord, fasciculus lateralis. That one that is located medially, medial cord, fasciculus medialis. And posteriorly, posterior cord, fasciculus posterior. This one. Brachial plexus has branches, short and long branches.
Ma'am, can you again show?
What?
Lateral cord.
This is lateral cord. This is medial cord. This one. And this is posterior cord.
Yes, ma'am.
This is posterior cord.
Okay.
So brachial plexus has short and long branches. Short branches are those which supply muscles of shoulder girdle and muscles of the back. And they mainly arise from supraclavicular part of brachial plexus. But there are short branches which arise from infraclavicular part also. So here, for example, we can see suprascapular nerve, nervus suprascapularis. It